Okay, I am here with Bob Nedderman or
Nedderman.
Nedderman. Okay, I'm in here on Wednesday, November 16 at 2:30 p.m. Okay, so let's begin. The first question will be, where, when were you born and raised?
I was born on January 7th, 1951 in Des Moines, Iowa. And
Oh.
I was raised there.
Okay, and then you moved to Nebraska.
Somewhat later, yes, after a stay in Missouri.
And when was your birth date?
January 7th, 1951.
Okay. And how old were you when your life got involved in the war?
Well,
With the war?
yeah, I suppose I was 14 or 15 when I first really became aware of the Vietnam War. Probably when I was in middle school, about 1965,
Okay. Long time ago.
a long time ago.
Okay, and what made you to get involved in the war, or like, do you get any involvement in the war, or only any family members?
I had an uncle, Uncle Jimmy, who was drafted along about 1967 or 68. But he had missed several times to be drafted because one of his legs was a little shorter than the other, because when he was a kid he had some friends were jumping off garage roofs and he broke his leg pretty badly, and that kept him out of the draft till he was like 26 years old. He was almost over the time edge.
Oh yeah.
And then they decided that no, he's not so messed up that we can't put him in the Army. So he went into the Army, but he was lucky, and of his company or group of about 175 men that he trained with, all but him and 2 or 3 others went to Vietnam, and he spent his Vietnam War in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah, his job was to keep track of who won interdivisional sports events.
Oh.
So he became a record keeper for sporting events in an American Army division in Germany.
Okay. Okay. Next question: what were you doing prior to the war starting, or prior to you or your family members get awareness of the war?
Okay, well, I mean, I was in school. I was in, because I'm not that old.
Yeah.
I was in middle school when I first became aware of the war, and then college, or high school and college. And of course, the war was on television. Mm-hmm. And one of my friends in my neighborhood was drafted into the Army, and he did go to Vietnam. He was a year older than me. So we were very aware of the war, and especially the war was very much on television. Mm-hmm. Every evening on the news, there was war news, and it almost never seemed to be good news.
Yeah, war is not good.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's not. It's not good news.
So you were in high school, right, in that time?
Right, I was in high
Okay.
school.
You were in a relationship or single?
I was in a relationship. I had a girlfriend in high school, and shortly after high school, Debbie Fox, appropriately named Debbie Fox. Oh, shouldn't have said that. Anyway, but so yes, and then after Debbie, when I was in college, I had another girlfriend, both of whom were interested in politics and followed the war and the anti-war movement, as did I.
Yeah.
As did I. One of my very good friends in high school was a man named John Tinker, who is a footnote in constitutional law. He was one of the plaintiffs in the case of Tinker versus School Board of Des Moines, Iowa, in which the Supreme Court declared that students do not leave their free speech rights behind them when they go to school. Mm-hmm. He and his sister and one or two other people wore black armbands to school in order to protest the war in Vietnam, and were then suspended for a bit of time. And
So they were suspended. They were doing all this protest during the war.
yes,
Oh,
yeah, this would have been 1966 or 7
okay.
that occurred. And then the court case comes, 68 or 9 or 70, somewhere in there, quite a bit later before they finally work it out.
Yeah.
But well, it's been whittled away at a little. That case is still law.
Mm-hmm.
So he's my claim to fame that I knew this guy. He was my friend. He was a Quaker, so he didn't have to go either because he was a conscientious objector.
So he is still alive?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, he is. In fact, he's my Facebook friend, and he's still, both he and his sister still go around and make the occasional appearance and speech at high schools and some colleges. Talk about their experience from long ago.
So what was your understanding on why the U.S. was involved in Vietnam?
I'm sorry, say again?
What was your understanding on why the U.S. was involved in Vietnam?
Well, it changed over time. As I grew older, at first, of course, I had no idea why. Then it looked like, I understood that it was to prevent communism from taking over. And then after a while, it began to look like it was more just about oil and power and running the world.
Yeah.
So my viewpoint kind of changed and grew.
Okay. So how did you learn about or receive information about the war? And how did that change your perspective?
Okay. Well, my main sources of information were, of course, the television news, the Des Moines Register and Tribune, which at that time was a very fine newspaper. The Register still exists, but it's not such a great paper now. The Des Moines Register and Tribune was a great paper and had wonderful news, very thorough reporting of the Vietnam War. Plus, books. There were books being published about the war. And then, of course, talking to my friends, and I went to college. So we spent, we didn't have some of the, things that y'all have now to entertain yourselves. We didn't have the internet, so we couldn't do research on that or spend, time on Facebook. And we didn't have video games, and for long periods of time didn't have television. I mean, there was television, of course, but there were 4 channels. So didn't watch television as much as one might now. Didn't have as much
A lot of changes.
A lot of changes, yeah. And so, well, we probably had less information than we do now. We were kind of pretty focused on it. Pretty focused.
So you told me before that you have some friends and family members that went to the war. So what was their roles or titles during the war?
Okay. Well, I told you about my uncle.
Yeah.
And what his rank was, I don't know. My friend Bob Bransfield, who went to Vietnam, was a combat infantryman of some sort, I think. And I don't know what his rank was. I do know that shortly after he got out, and we were driving around and a car backfired, how they do, and he tried to climb under the seat of a Volkswagen in order to get away from that. So he'd seen some combat and some shooting, and it was not very good. One of my cousins was in Vietnam also. My cousin James Barker Jr. Was an officer. He joined the Air Force in the Korean War and stayed in, and had become, I think, a lieutenant colonel by the time about the time I was getting ready to graduate from high school. At the time of the Tet Offensive, he was provost marshal in Saigon, which is a hard and dangerous job.
Yeah, really.
So he had a lot of experiences in Saigon. I believe he's deceased now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my friend Bob, I don't no idea where he is now. What
Yeah.
became of him?
So, your cousin have a military experience, right?
Oh yes.
And those your friend or your uncle have any military experience?
Well, my friend did. He was, I don't know any of the details
Yeah.
on his experience, but yes, he did. He was in combat. My uncle that I told you about, he was in Germany the whole time. So yeah, nobody shot at Uncle Jim. Uncle Jim never shot his gun probably after basic training. So
That's interesting. Yeah. And so, how were the soldier? I know that probably your friends told you how they were treated, and do you think they get proper care during the war?
I saw that question, and I really don't have much of an answer for you on that. My cousin retired from the Army and took up residence at a college town and had a great life, hanging around with college professors, who theoretically should have, been some of the least likely people, in the Vietnam era that an Army colonel would or Air Force colonel would enjoy spending time with. My friend Bob and my uncle, as far as I know, they were not, the stories you hear about mistreatment of veterans after the Vietnam War. I can't add to that. I have no experience with veterans being mistreated or with mistreating veterans, and I was involved in war protests at college and things like that, and I don't recall anyone abusing veterans, though I understand that it certainly happened.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, will you describe the atmosphere or what people were feeling during the war? Like, I know that you were in here, but how was the atmosphere in here?
The atmosphere where I was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably in your family or around you or your friends.
In my family, it was interesting to watch my parents go from supporting my father was a World War II veteran. Went from supporting the war early on to gradually moving away from it until they opposed the war. And remember Richard Nixon running for president and saying on TV, I have a plan to end the war in Vietnam. He would say that pretty regularly because he was running for election. I remember my mother saying, well, Richard, why don't you go tell Mr. Johnson your plan and we can get this over with. So she was pretty fed up. They were not particularly vocal opponents of the war. I and many of my friends were. Got into some arguments with other uncles over that, classic conservative uncles, we all have them. I was involved in some protests. I remember I was a sophomore, I believe, no, a freshman, second semester of my freshman year, at the time of the Kent State shooting in May 4th, 1970. Remember the day. On May 4th, 1970, I was at Grandview College. It's Grandview University now, which is near my neighborhood in Des Moines. And there were class walkouts, there were teach-ins, and there were memorial services. It was very somber and angry time, because these were 4 college students, people like us, who'd been shot by National Guard in Indiana. And after that, I became a little more active, and then by the time I was in, later in my college career, I was at the University of Iowa, and there were a good number of very, very serious demonstrations there.
Yeah.
And I was sort of on the edge of some of those. I wasn't a planner or an organizer or, like a wild person. But I was there. I was there.
Yeah, I guess it will be a really strong atmosphere, right?
Very strong.
It was.
It was very strong. It was very tense. It was very, very alive, vivid.
Yeah, how people
How
feel
people
about
felt.
it.
It was vivid, alive. Yeah. There was tension. There was, it was sort of bubbly. And sometimes it was exciting and kind of fun, and other times it was pretty scary.
Yeah.
I was tear gassed. That's not much fun. It takes a while to blow that out of your sinuses. But.
Yeah. So, how do you stay in touch with your friends?
Pardon?
How do you stay in touch with them during the war?
Oh, at that time? Well, telephone, some. I mean, talking about my friends who weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who was in the war zone, that was strictly by letter. Because phone calls were expensive, and that was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, my friends, that I was around with, phone calls, of course. We would gather in taverns and on campus, various places to get together. Letters.
Mm-hmm.
Letters and the telephone were the
First option.
main options, and the telephone was, if it was long distance, was not inexpensive. It was not, cell phones are
Another thing.
a
Yeah.
whole other deal. Yeah.
Yeah. So, were you worried about the U.S. might not win the war, and why do you think?
I was, and at one point in time, I came to the conclusion that the U.S. should not win the war, and that it was not, that winning that particular war was probably not a good thing. Not because the sacrifice wasn't worthwhile, or because, I was a pacifist, but because we were wrong. Our country was in the wrong about Vietnam, and we were supporting government and leadership there that did not deserve
To be in that
supported.
place. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they didn't deserve to be supported. Plus, our government under Johnson less so, under Nixon more so. I felt that they didn't respect the American people either.
Yeah. So yeah, I think talking about all that they don't respect the American people. Do you think that did you ever or they ever feel any discrimination during the war for being American? And if so, how did you or others react about that?
I did not. I mean, I never left the country during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was never in a foreign place, either. And if I'm not a soldier, so.
Yeah.
But I do know that, again from the news, from talking to people who were other places, that being an American wasn't necessarily going to get you invited to the best parties. It was not a great thing to be. Not a great thing to be. And when foreign exchange students would come, when they were willing to talk, they would tell us what people in their home countries thought about the war.
Wow.
Yeah, and, it was not something
Was a
that was
big
nice to
deal.
hear.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah. In the war times, how do you think people entertain themselves? Like the soldiers. I know that they have to be in duty and all this stuff, but how do you think they entertain themselves?
The soldiers, well, again, from what I was told, and I'm trying to separate out, things that I saw in movies and stuff. But from what I was told, letters from home are really important. Anytime you could hear from somebody at home. I think there were the occasional phone call, and that was important. They read. You know, depending on where you were, you probably could watch television. You know, there would be shows. You know, if you were in a back area, anyway, you might get like USO. Records, boy, people had records. You know, recorded music. And a lot of people, you know, if they were, you know, at all where they were, you know, I could have these things, you know, because they weren't that portable.
Yeah.
And there was always music. Boy. Lots of dope. You know, time passes more quickly when you're high.
Yeah.
And that was the main thing, was just pass the time, get through it, get home. That was what most people were thinking about.
Yeah.
That I know of while they were there. And with, you know, they nearly always knew how long they were going for.
But
So-
someone's don't.
Which, yeah, they don't so much now.
Yeah.
And of course in World War II, they didn't, you know, you were there till it was over.
Yeah.
Whereas with Vietnam, you had a rotation, and you knew when you were going home. You know, so that was to be looked forward to. You know, again, this is all secondary information.
Yeah.
in my
Well,
book,
yeah. No. Don't worry. So, do your family your friends' military experience influence their thinking about war or about the military in general?
At that time, yes, and not favorably. You know, that was a different army from my father's army, and it was a different army from the army that my son has just recently separated from. But at that time, the army was not. I don't think they were competent. You know, there was something wrong at the leadership level of the American Army at that point in time.
Yeah, and in that war, since you were in college and all that stuff, do you have any effects on you? Like, for example, you just told me that your son is in war right now, or in
No,
duty.
he's not. He's out now.
Oh, okay, but
Yeah, he was.
he was in war.
But
Okay.
he's not. No, he never had to shoot his gun.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But what do you think about your son being in the military service?
It was scary at first. I said, "Oh, you know, is this really the path you want to go down?" Because, it's a dangerous path. But no, it really has changed. I think. Anyway, and he had a technical specialty that kept him out of harm's way most of the time.
Oh.
Whereas my father was in harm's way all the time. But it was different. My father, you know, he knew pretty well. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was fighting for, and he didn't like it,
Oh.
but he did it.
Yeah.
And my friends who went to the war in Vietnam, the impression I get from a lot of them, and just from, you know, the people that I met, was that they didn't have much purpose in that. They didn't feel like they had purpose.
Yeah, okay. So your father was on World War II, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, what do you do in the days and weeks after the war? What was your thinking and that?
I was glad it was over. I was, you know, when my uncle and my friends came home, I was glad that they were home safely and out of it. I kind of just went on with my life, you know, because I was not nearly as affected as such folks were. You know, with the anti-war, with the war over, there was no need to be anti-war.
Yeah.
I sort of just gradually fell back and developed a life. got married, children.
Kid.
Yeah, you know, the whole catastrophe. No, it's fine. It's good. It's good.
So, how did you feel about the U.S. withdrawing from the war?
I thought it was about time. It was a good thing, and it should have been done a lot earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I am quite convinced that absolutely no good came from the last 2, 3, 4 years in Vietnam. You know, outside of a lot of destruction, a lot of death, you know, horrible damage to Vietnam and Cambodia. You know, more and more of our own people injured. The American society, the home society, torn pretty badly apart. It was, you know, something that you know, assuming we have gotten over it, took 20 years to get over.
20 years?
At least 20 years, yeah. So 75, 85, 95, maybe even longer, maybe into the 90s before it started to seem like a normal peace country again to me.
So the protest continues after the war, or they stopped?
They stopped. They stopped. There was no need for them.
Yeah.
Some people, you know, went on and found new things
Mm-hmm.
to protest. There was plenty, but most of us no.
Mm-hmm.
No. But the tension was still there. You know, in some cases, the despair, the mistrust. It is from the war in Vietnam that your typical American distrust of his or her own government comes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the government's doing this, the government's doing that. What are they up to?
Mm-hmm.
That's Vietnam.
Yeah.
That mistrust.
And why do you think the U.S. failed to win the war?
I'm going to get metaphysical here. I'm going to say we lost because we were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And while we had huge firepower that we threw at Vietnam, it wasn't enough. And because they were determined, and it was their country.
Mm-hmm.
When it's your country, you can hide in it.
Yeah.
And you know, and this happened over and over and over again in Vietnam. You know, U.S. or South Korea or South Vietnamese, U.S. or South Vietnamese troops would move through an area, you know, fight, clean it out, and go on, and you know, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese would be right back.
Yeah.
Because they could blend in. It was their country.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of cruelty on their side too. It wasn't, you know, it was not a nice war, not a good war from any standpoint, but it was, you know, their country. And because of that, they were able to control the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
Not the cities, but the countryside.
They can.
And eventually, you know, they just wore us down.
So, about that, what lessons did you learn that you would want to others to remember about this time in history?
Well, I think the most important lesson, the national lesson, is that we're not unbeatable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because we've always sort of thought that, and no real reason to think that, but until Vietnam, we thought we couldn't be beaten.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good knowledge to have, to know that we might not always win, and we might not always be right,
Yeah.
and that as a people, we have to think about these things and make judgments about them and not just be led.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being a follower is important, and you have to be thinking when you're a follower, which is what, you know, most citizens are.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just blindly go where you're told. Have to to think about it, have to debate it, have to make sure that our direction is right, you know, and people have to do that together.
Yes. So how have your experiences? I know that you stay in here, but do you think that any experiences that you get from the war shape you as a person right now?
I suspect so. I mean, because those were my formative, young adult years. So, but just how, I don't know, because I don't know anything else.
Yeah.
I suspect that, just comparing how the kid I was to the young adult I became, more cynical, less trusting. Come back to that, I guess.
Okay. So what do you think we could done differently during the war, or some decisions or some acts?
There, I think, it's hard to say how we could have avoided that, given the way we thought about things, given the way, the world looked to Americans, especially to American leaders at that time. When did it become too late to get out of Vietnam? I mean, was it in the late 50s when we were starting to send advisors, in the early 60s? Probably if, when the colonels rose up and assassinated the president of South Vietnam in late 1963, that was probably our last real chance to get out of there without a lot of damage. And to just, let them go. But before that, we backed the French when the French tried to take it back after World War II, and that was a mistake right there. That was the French's mistake, and it was our mistake to back them. It was, just not their country anymore. But history is so complicated like that. Yeah.
Right now. So if you could explain the war in one word, what it will be, and can you elaborate on why you choose that word?
Okay. It's quagmire, like a tar baby, or something just, you get all tangled up in something sticky.
Yeah.
And you can't get out of it. There's an old Pete Seeger song. Are you familiar with Pete Seeger?
No.
Well, you should become familiar with Pete Seeger, Seeger, I think. Folk singer, wonderful. He had a song called Waist Deep in the Big Muddy. And then it was Shoulder Deep in the Big Muddy. And then it was, the Big Muddy, it's the Mississippi River is the Big Muddy, but it got, became Vietnam. And you keep going in. You keep going in. You keep going in, and pretty soon you drown.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect metaphor for the war in Vietnam, and for a lot of other kinds of wars too. I think it's it's a trap.
Yeah. Never heard about it. I will listen to it.
Yeah, waist deep in the big money. The big fool said to push on.
So, when your friends and when your uncle returned, they receive up how they were received up on their returning to America, and were they awarded any medals or honors?
My uncle, good conduct medal, because he was behaved well. My friend, I don't know if he came back with any medals. I don't know of any. I think they were both kind of keep your head down and don't do anything stupid kind of guys.
Just wait.
Just wait. Yeah, my father was the same way. I mean, he did his job, but he didn't. He was old enough to know that he was mortal, and not to do anything foolish. You can fight in a war smartly and dumbly, and
Yeah.
as far as I know, they all fought smartly and came home.
Independent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you think there were any effects on their physical or mental health?
Oh, certainly. Even my friend I told you about,
Yeah.
a loud noise set him flying to, and of course, one gets over that. But maybe he didn't. I don't know, because I really haven't seen him, much after he got back. So I don't know what his life turned into. A lot of those guys have nightmares and nervous conditions all the time. And looking back on my own father, he probably had some PTSD. He almost certainly did, in fact. As did so many. Just didn't know what it was.
Yeah, nightmares and
Nightmare. Oh yeah, horrible nightmares and
I bet.
digestive problems, all sorts of things that nervous things that keep going wrong with people.
Yeah.
And with World War II, it was over. You were back. You won. Unless it was really severe, you could live with it. Vietnam less so. Because there was no victory to come home with.
Yeah.
You just came back wrecked. And I knew of people like that. Not the people that it was close to, fortunately.
Well, that's sad. So, was the well, you already told me this, but how was work life after the war? It was easy to get involved again, or?
Oh, well, because I could get jobs. It was, there were jobs in the 70s, and as far as guys coming back from the service, I don't know. I suppose that would depend on their individual circumstances. My uncle had no problem getting a job.
Oh, that's fine.
I don't think he had the same job after as he had before, but he had no problem.
Oh, okay. So, what are your feelings about the war in this day?
That war?
Yeah, the Vietnam War.
It was a mistake. Shouldn't have been there.
For you, was the U.S. a hero or a villain in the Vietnam War?
Oh, I hate to make it so black and white.
Oh, it's okay.
I think we were in the wrong,
Please.
but I don't think villain is right either. Except in a few cases. There's some obvious cases like the war crimes, the My Lai War. You heard about that. The Cambodia bombings, those things. There we were villains. But take it as an overall picture. I hate to be quite so stark as that.
Yeah, but sometimes it depends on,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Cambodia thing, that was bad.
Yeah. So, do you have any specific experience that from the Vietnam War era that you can't forget, or your most vivid memory of the time period?
That would be Kent State. Hearing about the Kent State massacre, shooting. That really affected me. That could have been me. Wandering around a college campus. The people that were shot at Kent State weren't necessarily the ones in the front line of the riot or demonstration or whatever was going on there.
Yeah.
At least one or two of them were people that just happened to be, like behind that somewhere. One person walking in class was shot and killed. But bullets don't stop when.
Yeah.
And that was very memorable. And running away from being gassed one time, that was very memorable too. But that was, for a long time, that was just fun. Oh boy, I got gassed. Now I'm glad I didn't get clubbed or arrested too.
So, what do you think your family members will feel about their service in these days from the Vietnam War?
You mean like,
right now? Yeah. Do you think they will be happy about it, or how do you think they will react?
oh, I don't have any idea.
Mm. Yeah. Did you or your family members join any veterans organization after the war?
I don't know. I don't know if my uncle did or not. You mean like the American Legion or the VFW?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
How have your views on the war changed over time? Or they always like, you're always thinking we're in the wrong spot?
Well, certainly since the end of the war, since then, they haven't changed much. No, I feel now about like I did
The
then.
same.
It was a mistake. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just to end this, if you could do it again, will you fight in Vietnam? If there was...
If it were an option for me, because remember because of my hand,
Yeah.
I was not eligible.
Mm-hmm.
But pretending if I were eligible, I think I would decline. I would not go.
Okay.
Looking back now,
Yeah.
to then I might have made a different decision. But looking back now, I would not go.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I will stop the recorder right now.
It's been my pleasure.